March 18, 2006. Before dawn in the Gulf of Aden, two U.S. Navy warships, USS Cape St. George and USS Gonzales, patrolled a known piracy corridor. The sea was quiet, but radar told another story. Three fast skiffs approached without lights, closing fast. Alarms sounded. The crew went to battle stations. Then, gunfire. The pirates struck first, but they had no idea who they were challenging. In seconds, the U.S. Navy responded with overwhelming force. Smoke, fire, and shattered hulls followed. The attack failed, but the mission wasn't over. What came next would shock the pirates and stun the world. At 3:30 in the early hours of March 18, 2006, the USS Gonzales and USS Cape St. George detected two fast-moving skiffs approaching from the southeast. The vessels had no identification, no flag, and no navigation lights. They were running dark, slicing through the waves at high speed. Their profile matched known pirate configurations: long, narrow hulls powered by outboard motors, one larger skiff towing two smaller ones. In the combat information centers aboard both U.S. warships, alarm codes were acknowledged. The radar tracks showed a direct approach, steady bearing, no signs of deviation. This was not a fishing party. It was a threat. Lookouts on deck confirmed visual contact. The silhouettes were low, hugging the surface of the sea. Infrared sensors picked up heat signatures. The crew on both American ships snapped into protocol. Weapons teams went to readiness. The bridge issued warnings over maritime frequencies. No response. Minutes passed, but the skiffs closed in. Suddenly, gunfire erupted from one of the smaller pirate boats. Muzzle flashes lit up the night as AK-47 rounds raked toward the Gonzales. The pirates had opened fire first. It was no longer speculation. The engagement had begun. The USS Cape St. George responded instantly. 50 caliber machine guns on the port side lit up the waterline with precise bursts. On the Gonzales, crew members activated the Phalanx CIWS. Its radar locked onto the leading skiff, tracking the incoming fire. Then came the retaliation. A series of short, controlled bursts from the CIWS peppered the water and hull. One tracer round ignited a fuel drum on the main skiff. Flames spread across the deck. Pirates began leaping into the sea. Screams echoed across the black water. The second skiff stopped abruptly. Its crew stood up and dropped their weapons into the waves. Boarding teams aboard RHIBs launched within minutes. American sailors in flak vests and helmets moved in fast. They approached the smoking wreckage and the floating survivors with discipline and caution. 11 men were detained, 5 of them wounded. One body was recovered from the charred wreckage. Weapons were seized. The fire was extinguished. The 2 remaining skiffs were towed away for investigation. Cape St. George and Gonzales resumed formation. On the bridge, no one celebrated. The mood was focused, precise, procedural. They had been attacked. They had responded. Now came the aftermath. Intelligence officers began collecting reports. Each sailor who fired gave a statement. Every round was accounted for. Sensors and footage were archived. Onboard medics treated the wounded pirates while security teams guarded the detainees. Satellite communications relayed the incident back to command. A clear message was taking shape across the region. Pirates had misjudged their target. They had mistaken warships for merchant cargo vessels. That mistake had cost them dearly. For the crews aboard the American ships, the engagement was validation of their training. There had been no panic. Orders had been followed without hesitation. Weapons had been used with discipline. Not a single sailor had been injured. For the pirates, it was a collapse. What they believed would be a quick, aggressive raid had turned into fire, steel, and surrender. The aftermath of the pirate attack was not a victory lap. It was a controlled escalation. As the smoke still hung over the sea and bodies floated in the warm waters of the Gulf of Aden, American sailors moved in. Their objective was not revenge. It was recovery, intelligence, and control. The RHIBs circled the survivors. Every man in the water was ordered to raise his hands, show he was unarmed, and comply. Even then, approach was cautious. Floating debris could hide weapons. Wounded men might still resist. In combat zones, seconds decide everything. Once aboard, each pirate was restrained, searched, and identified. Aboard the RHIBs, silence was broken only by the hum of the outboards and the crackle of the radio. Back on the USS Gonzales, temporary holding areas were cleared on deck. Corpsmen triaged the wounded. One pirate with shrapnel injuries groaned through clenched teeth. Another clutched a burn across his shoulder. The body of the deceased was wrapped and documented. This wasn't a battlefield anymore. It was a crime scene at sea. Every photograph, every weapon tag, every injury report could be used later for prosecution or intelligence analysis. Weapons recovered included AK-47s, RPG tubes, machetes, and handheld radios. One radio was still tuned to a frequency transmitting static, likely a failed connection with another boat. That detail concerned intelligence officers. Was another skiff nearby? Were there reinforcements waiting beyond radar range? The CIC ramped up scans. Helicopter crews stood by. The ocean around them remained calm, but no one relaxed. Combat may last minutes. Tension lasts hours. Back in the Combat Information Center, officers compiled data from radar, FLIR, drone footage, and visual reports. One image stood out. A boat matching the pirate configuration seen earlier, but positioned further southeast at the edge of radar coverage. It had not engaged, had not approached, but was clearly observing. That boat vanished shortly after the Gonzales opened fire. Naval intelligence marked the vessel as a probable scout. This changed the threat matrix. It meant the pirates were coordinating. They weren't acting in isolation. They had reconnaissance. They had fallback plans. This observation prompted a shift in protocol. The patrol area widened. Air assets were redirected. The USS Cape St. George launched its SH-60B Seahawk to run extended search patterns. Alongside, drones were tasked with sweeping abandoned coves and possible launch points along the coast. The priority was now prevention. The U.S. Navy had made its point, but to maintain deterrence, they had to keep pressure constant. Meanwhile, the detainees were processed. They were separated based on behavior and affiliation. Interrogators began gathering basic data, names, origins, affiliations. Some refused to speak. Others broke quickly. One detainee claimed they had received a green light from a coastal commander in Puntland who assured them that the route was clear of military presence. Another insisted they mistook the warships for commercial tankers. Both statements were logged and forwarded. Naval intelligence had its leads. What had started as a high-speed gunfight had now become a layered security operation. The guns had gone silent, but the mission had shifted into something more complex: psychological pressure, surveillance dominance, and information extraction. The crew of the USS Gonzales understood this phase was just as critical, because in modern naval warfare, the moments after the bullets stop often reveal the most. While the wounded pirates were stabilized and the evidence cataloged, the command team aboard the USS Gonzales remained on high alert. Intelligence analysts continued to dissect the radar logs and communications frequencies captured during the encounter. Every anomaly mattered. One odd signal came from a low-frequency burst captured minutes before the attack. It was short, encrypted, and bounced through several relays. Signals officers flagged it, not just because of the timing, but because it was similar to patterns previously associated with pirate logistics cells based on shore. That signal had a point of origin, and that meant a starting point. Within the hour, a coordinated request for satellite imagery was filed. Naval assets linked up with coalition intelligence partners to scan the suspected coastal regions. The infrared signatures of small camps, possibly supply caches or launch points, began to appear. This was exactly the kind of preemptive information that could shift naval posture from reactive to proactive. But time mattered. The longer the delay, the more likely the pirates would move or erase the evidence. Aboard the USS Cape St. George, tactical planners revised patrol routes. The Seahawk helicopter was retasked to fly reconnaissance along the coast using low-altitude, wide-angle sweeps. Pilots were briefed to stay under radar and avoid pattern repetition. Their mission: photograph, map, and mark any vessel or shoreline structure showing signs of logistical activity. The clock was ticking. Pirate groups were known to dismantle operations within hours of an engagement. If the Navy wanted to capitalize on its momentum, it needed to press advantage immediately. Meanwhile, tension on board never eased. The detainees remained separated. The smell of diesel and gunpowder lingered on deck. Gun crews stayed at stations. Fire control systems remained warm. Even routine messages between bridge and engine room carried a different tone. The entire ship felt coiled, like a loaded spring. No one forgot that just hours earlier they had been under fire, then a blip. At 16:42, CIC reported a radar contact small, fast, approaching from the south at 40 knots. Another skiff, not broadcasting, not responding. This time, no one waited. The USS Gonzales broke formation, turned toward the contact, and signaled for interception. The SH-60B took off immediately. From the air, the Seahawk confirmed visual on the skiff, 2 men aboard, one manning a mounted weapon, another holding binoculars. They weren't fishing, and they weren't fleeing. The order was clear: shadow, not strike. The Seahawk hovered at distance. The skiff continued its path, arcing west, then doubling back toward shore. For 30 minutes, it ran a pattern triangular, slow, then fast. It was testing radar thresholds, timing response speeds, and evaluating the Navy's presence. This was not opportunistic piracy. It was recon, and it meant something else. The U.S. Navy had disrupted a network, but networks adapt. What began that morning as a surprise attack had now shifted into an intelligence war, one fought with sensors, speed, and signals. And while no shots were fired this time, everyone aboard knew it was only a matter of when. The presence of the recon skiff confirmed a reality the crew had suspected but not yet proven. The attack that morning had not been an isolated act of desperation. It was a coordinated effort, part of a layered structure that operated across the sea and the coastline. That changed everything. Instead of treating the engagement as a completed event, Naval Command now viewed it as a node within a larger web, and that meant follow-up was no longer optional. It was imperative. The USS Gonzales and USS Cape St. George entered a new posture. They were no longer just responding to an incident. They were shaping the response of an entire region. Coalition ships in Combined Task Force 150 were notified. Rules of engagement were updated to reflect elevated threat coordination. Nearby merchant vessels were contacted with direct guidance. Convoys were rerouted. Helicopters now flew overlapping search patterns 24 hours a day. What had begun as a violent 15-minute clash had turned into a broad-spectrum surge of presence and pressure. Back in the intelligence rooms, linguists worked on translating intercepted chatter. A few fragments stood out. References to metal giants and red smoke likely described the warships and the tracer fire seen during the battle. Another message, short and incomplete, mentioned a signal lost near a known smuggling inlet. That one detail sparked immediate interest. Analysts cross-referenced that location with recent imagery and detected signs of hasty withdrawal, tarps half-folded, fuel drums abandoned. It appeared that pirate operators inland were already scattering. This confirmed what the Navy had hoped. The engagement had ripple effects, not just in the waters, but deep into the safe zones pirates relied upon. A show of strength at sea was triggering panic ashore. For years, pirate gangs operated with near impunity from coastal bases protected by corruption and geography. But this time, the pressure had reached them faster than expected. And with it came disruption, fear, and fragmentation. Commanders aboard the Cape St. George drafted a proposal. It outlined a 36-hour saturation patrol involving multiple vessels and aerial assets to sweep and clear key approach zones. The goal was not only to deny pirates a chance to regroup, but also to collect forensic data from abandoned positions. If executed correctly, the patrol would generate intelligence while preventing immediate retaliation attempts. The plan was transmitted to higher command and greenlit within hours. Ships moved, helicopters refueled, orders went out. This was the moment when strategy overtook reaction. The Navy was no longer waiting for pirates to reveal themselves. It was flushing them out. Zones previously considered low risk were now treated as potential ambush points. Communications monitoring intensified. Signals from inland transmitters were triangulated. And on every ship in the task force, crews worked around the clock, but as focused as the operation became, the weight of the original exchange still lingered. The 11 detainees now in temporary custody were a living reminder. Their silence, injuries, and defiance formed a mosaic of what piracy had become. Not just a desperate act by fishermen turned criminals, but an organized, adaptive threat rooted in failed states and funded by black market logistics. What happened that morning was not an exception. It was a preview, and far beyond the horizon, others were watching, testing, waiting. As night fell over the Gulf of Aden, the glow of combat had faded, but not the consequences. The USS Gonzales and USS Cape St. George maintained patrol stations under full operational readiness. Their radar scopes glowed with contacts, real and phantom, as the warm sea pulsed with tension. The fleet had shifted into a mindset of total control, aware that the window of momentum was narrow and decisive action had to be taken before the adversary could regroup. At 2000 hours, the Cape St. George's Seahawk returned from its final recon flight of the day. Its crew reported heat signatures in an inlet along the Somali coast, consistent with outboard engines and recent human activity. The coordinates matched the suspected pirate staging point flagged earlier by intelligence. But the presence of life did not mean engagement was viable. Rules of engagement were strict. Any strike required visual confirmation of hostile action. The mission now entered a gray zone where threats were real but hidden, and response had to walk the line between legality and lethality. Commanders chose to deploy unmanned aerial systems for closer surveillance. A drone launched from the Gonzales flew inland at low altitude, equipped with high-resolution optics and infrared. What it saw confirmed suspicions. 3 skiffs recently hauled onto shore lay in camouflage netting. Men moved between them carrying crates and fuel drums. One figure stood holding a radio, transmitting on a frequency known from the earlier encounter. This was not a fishing village. It was a logistics hub. The intelligence packet was relayed through the task force chain. Authorization for a precision strike was requested. It was denied, not because the threat wasn't credible, but because the collateral risk was too high. Children had been seen in the background. The Navy had rules, and in that moment, restraint became the greater weapon. Instead of missiles, they sent a message. Low and fast, the drone swooped in at treetop level, startling the men below. Crates dropped. Radios went silent. The message was clear. We see you. We are close, and we are not afraid to get closer. In parallel, electronic warfare systems aboard the Gonzales began jamming known pirate frequencies. Communications between shore teams and offshore spotters fell apart. Several signals cut off mid-transmission. One skiff attempting to leave was intercepted and boarded without resistance. Its cargo, extra fuel, and ration packs was logged and destroyed. There was no fight, only silence and surrender. That night, the task force established a temporary control zone stretching 30 nautical miles off the Somali coast. Airspace was monitored. Every fishing boat was hailed. Boarding teams conducted random checks not to intimidate, but to assert presence. Word spread. Local radio channels began warning smugglers and pirate crews that the Americans were no longer passive. They were watching, they were moving, and they were not going away. What had begun with bullets was now driven by presence, precision, and pressure. The pirates may have fired first, but the U.S. Navy would determine when the conflict ended. By sunrise, the waters off the Somali coast had gone quiet. But the silence didn't mean safety. It meant calculation. The USS Gonzales and USS Cape St. George had asserted dominance, but their mission was not over. Patrols continued. Boarding teams inspected vessels. Radar stations stayed manned. The threat wasn't gone. It had simply gone dark. The 11 pirates in custody were separated and processed, their weapons cataloged, their skiffs destroyed. No Americans were hurt. Yet the real victory wasn't measured in bodies or firepower. It was strategic. This single engagement had disrupted a regional network and exposed its logistics. On land, pirate factions scrambled. Some abandoned coastal posts. Others cut communications. Intelligence intercepts revealed confusion and panic. The names Gonzales and Cape St. George spread fast, not as targets, but as warnings. The message was simple. The U.S. Navy was watching, and if provoked, it would strike. What began as a surprise attack ended in disruption, surveillance, and control. The pirates may have fired first, but the Navy ended it on its terms. This wasn't just a defense, it was a reminder. In modern naval warfare, readiness is power, and presence is dominance. The pirates misjudged their target and paid the price. What they believed would be an easy strike became a disaster. In 15 minutes, their assault collapsed under the weight of precision firepower and tactical control. But this wasn't just about one fight. It was about deterrence. The Gulf of Aden was watching. So were others. The message was clear. American warships are not prey. They are the predators. In modern maritime warfare, there are no second chances. The U.S. Navy didn't just repel an attack, it shattered a network and reminded the world who owns the sea.